Right, ladies and gentlemen, and all the delegates joining us, a warm welcome to all of you again. It's the second day of the world's largest FinTech Fest, the Global FinTech Fest. This event is organized by FinTech Convergence Council and Payments Council of India, of Internet and Mobile Association of India, and National Payments Corporation of India. The fest is presented by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India, and Reserve Bank of India, and Startup India and Invest India. On that note, we'd also like to take a quick opportunity to thank our partners, our session partners, Australian Trade and Investment Commission, WorldPlay from FIS, eBiotech Corporation, our CX partner Zendesk, cloud communication partner Root Mobile, and our insights partner Credit Watch, conversational messaging partner Gupshup, credit insights partner TransUnion Civil. With that, as we move forward, it's going to be a very interesting fireside chat as we discuss around transforming monetary policies and CBDC. Without any further ado, let me firstly welcome someone who's very, very well renowned in terms of asking the right questions in order to get the right answers. We have with us none other than Lata Venkat, who will be moderating this fireside chat, featuring our speaker, Mr. Tobias Adrian, Financial Counselor and Director, Monetary and Capital Markets Department, International Monetary Fund. In fact, he leads the IMF's work on financial sector surveillance, monetary, and many more. And I'm sure I must say this, that considering that we have both the stalwarts joining in, both amazing speakers joining in, it's time to deep dive and gather as many insights as possible. Which is why I'd like to urge all our members of the audience to please go ahead and share your questions in the Q&A box on the right side of the screen, so that when time permits, Lata will be more than happy to take those questions and have them answered. So on that note, let's get into the session. And with that, Lata, over to you.
Thank you very much for that very generous introduction. There's certainly one expert here, and that's Tobias. So I too have a lot of questions for him. Without much ado, thank you very much, Tobias Adrian, for joining us and helping us understand what's top of mind for everyone. Now, before I get to monetary policies, central banks, and their digital currency, can you just zoom out and tell us the other digital currencies that we normally come across? I mean, cryptocurrencies, stable coins, and how will central bank digital currency be any different?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me here today. It's wonderful to be in India virtually. I'm dialing in from Washington, D.C., and this is really a fascinating discussion, and this festival is very impressive. So let me start with Lata's question about different types of digital money. So what is very common today is electronic money, electronic cash. So this is when you use a debit card or a credit card in a store to buy your coffee or to buy a shirt or anything. It is very widespread both in India and around the world, and it is an important part of the monetary system today. Then there are the cryptocurrencies. So this is Bitcoin and Ethereum. And those are primarily speculative assets. So these are investment vehicles. There has been a lot of speculation. There has been a lot of run-up in valuations, also some volatility. And it is becoming a more and more popular investment class. In principle, you can make some payments with cryptocurrencies, such as with Bitcoin, but it's very, very limited. Very few merchants, for example, accept Bitcoins. There are some in the world, but it's very rare. It's not a very good means of payment because of the volatility of value, right? Ideally, you want to have something in your wallet, whether it's a physical wallet or a digital wallet, that has a stable value. And Bitcoin certainly fluctuates a lot. It's not very fast when you transact, and it's not very cheap when you transact. So it's not a very good form of cash. But it is an investment vehicle that is very popular. And then there are the stable coins. And stable coins are also crypto assets, but they are tied to a reserve. So, for example, they could be tied to the rupee or the US dollar or, say, the yen or renminbi. And so they do have stability because they have a reserve, but they use crypto technologies so that you can use them in wallets. And so that, I think, is one fundamental difference between e-money and, say, stable coins or crypto assets, is the technology, is that you're using digital wallets. And those are becoming more and more popular. Let me stop here.
Okay, got that. Now, if you're saying that cryptocurrencies have, like bitcoins, have not really been a medium of exchange, they've been more a store of value. They've been more an asset. If that's the case, then why are central banks rushing to issue their own digital currency? There was one view that they're all, they were afraid that monetary policy will be taken away if everyone started buying and selling in bitcoins or some other cryptos. But if that's not the case, why are central banks even talking about launching their own digital currency?
Yeah, so central bank digital currencies could indeed be somewhat similar. They don't necessarily have to be, but they could be similar to crypto assets. So they could be based on blockchain technologies, and they could be available in wallets. It depends on the design, whether it's based on existing payment systems or it's using these new very powerful blockchain technologies. So central banks around the world are indeed rushing in to think about central bank digital currencies. And that is because it is very appealing for a central bank to also go along with technological progress, right? There are new technologies that are available, and consumers, in principle, will want to have the experience of those new forms of technologies, and so central banks should play a part in that. It's very natural, really. And we would imagine that there could be a lot of innovation on top of these central bank digital currencies. So there could be payments platforms, but also perhaps lending platforms and other financial services that would be based on the CBDCs. Now, CBDCs, so central bank digital currencies, would be designed to be very stable. So there would be very good means of payments. There would be stable in value. They would have very low transaction costs, probably free in terms of transacting, and they would be backed by the central bank, so you could have a lot of confidence in the value. So it's very different from Bitcoin or so, which fluctuates a lot in value, which is more like an investment asset.
Uh, you know, Tobias, you'll be best placed to say this because you're in the IMF. How many central banks are really seriously thinking about, CBDCs? I think people in Japan seem to be a lot comfortable with cash. I hear US and some parts of Europe are also comfortable with cash. Then who's leading the charge in terms of CBDCs?
Yeah, it's at this point, it's the majority of central banks around the world are thinking about CBDCs. There are various surveys. It's about 80 to 100 central banks that are exploring the issue. And when you look at the major central banks, so say the G20 central banks, I think every single one has some sort of pilot program. They're testing different technologies, or they're at the stage where they're thinking about how to design these things. So I do think that central bank digital currencies will come eventually. It might not be very, very quickly, but it will come. It does not necessarily replace cash, right? There could be a role for physical cash as well as for digital cash, right? So these two things could be complementary, but digital cash is certainly appealing in terms of innovation, in terms of increasing financial inclusion, in terms of offering new services, new lending services. So it could be very, very useful for a very large part of the population.
Okay. How do you expect central banks will issue it? I don't have a bank account with the Reserve Bank of India. I have it with the commercial banks. So will central banks issue it through my friendly neighborhood bank, or will I have to open an account with the central bank itself?
Yeah, now central banks certainly don't want to be in the business of having millions or billions of accounts in the case of India, right? So central banks are not in that business. So it would be just as with cash today, right? You never go to the Reserve Bank of India to get your cash. You go to the branch of your local bank or an ATM at the corner store.
That's right.
And digital cash would be like that. It would be distributed electronically, probably in your phone, right? In your phone, you could have money in a savings account, in a checking account, and in a digital wallet. And so the digital wallet is just a digital representation of cash, just as your physical wallet is a wallet. So it's a digital wallet, and that's all it is. So you never need to directly transact with the reserve bank, but you have something in the wallet. You have like a token in the wallet that is guaranteed and backed by the reserve bank. So in that sense, you have all the trust of the reserve bank without ever having to interact with the reserve bank directly.
No, that's all very well. I mean, trust certainly more than perhaps a Bitcoin, where there may be a little bit of a doubt since you don't see a physical issuer. But, Bitcoins promise us anonymity. Nobody will know what I bought and sold with a Bitcoin. But central bank digital currency takes away the anonymity of cash. And do you think that will be a point of resistance in some countries? Why should anyone know what I do with cash?
That's an excellent point. And that is indeed when central banks ask the population about what they think about CBDCs, the population says, I don't want the central bank to know what I do with my money, right? It's a very profound feeling in most countries. And that is indeed a limit as to how big CBDCs could become. Now, of course, the technology can be construed in a way that central banks know very little or perhaps nothing. So they will want to be able to have law enforcement make sure that these coins are not used for criminal activity. You will want to be able to prosecute, right?
Yes.
But you don't want to use the data for anything else.
Okay.
And then the question is, does the population trust the institution that this data is not used for anything but for, say, criminal prosecutions, to make sure that terrorist financing is not done in this currency? And, that gets to the trust issue. And you are right, it might be that the central bank digital currency is a useful backstop, but it doesn't play a large role in terms of how much is out there. And there could be private forms of money, such as stable coins, that could be very popular and very important, and those would have a very different privacy perception, at least.
Okay, time permitting, I'll come back to this point about
Yeah.
privacy and the use and misuse, possible positive uses and abuses of a central bank currency, a digital currency. But before that, cross-border transfers have always been expensive. I mean, students who go abroad from India will tell you that when their parents have to send money to them, it's a very expensive proposition. We end up paying big fat fees to banks, and it takes a lot of time as well, using the SWIFT and stuff like that. Do you think if two countries, actually the Indian Central Bank has even got into an agreement with the MAS of Singapore, and they're working to try and connect the payment systems of the two countries. Will there come a time when you can therefore transfer money from central bank to central bank? If Tobias is in Singapore and Lata wants to pay him, I deduct from my central bank account in Reserve Bank and add to Tobias's account in the MAS. That way, we will save a lot of fees and time. You see that day arriving?
Yes, I think that could very well be possible. In fact, today already, there are some wallet providers that allow you to exchange, say, US dollar stablecoins against rupee stablecoins or so. And, it's not free either. So there's some implicit fee that is in there, but it is much cheaper than what you're referring to, money transfer operators, etc. So I do envision that this market for cross-border transfers could become a lot cheaper for small amounts of payments. Of course, if you want to wire millions and millions of dollars or rupees or so, then you still have to go through the banks. But for, the typical example that you are giving, say a remittance payment from somebody who works abroad, or wiring some funds to your
To your
daughter
parents.
or son or so, for studying abroad, that I imagine will be very cheap in the future.
Okay.
And we're already seeing some of that with stable coins, which are denominated in different currencies.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's throwing up a lot of questions, but this is a crazy political one. Do you think if countries can start transferring money without using the SWIFT or without using banks, commercial banks, then perhaps countries can't impose sanctions, isn't it? The sanctions work normally because you're using the banking system and converting from dollars.
Right.
Maybe there is a political economy angle to this?
Yes, there's absolutely a political economy angle to it. Already today, we see that in some countries, some emerging markets in particular, that the capital flows associated with Bitcoins are very large relative to, say, traditional bank capital transfers. And so that raises a question for countries. And a number of countries have gone to prohibit certain types of activities with Bitcoins. So in principle, you could design a system that imposes sanctions or capital controls in a way that is compatible with the policy framework of the country.
Yeah.
And so this is why regulating this sector is very important. So as an individual, you would use a wallet, and the wallet provider, that could be a technology company or it could be a bank. But that wallet provider would be regulated in a manner that is consistent with whatever laws and rules you have, whether it's in India or in some other country.
No, of course, you could be regulated. Well, let me first zoom out and ask the most priority question first. How do you see it coming? I mean, is there any country which is already seeing CBDCs being used even for some transactions? When will I first encounter CBDC? In which country?
Well, if you travel to the Bahamas,
Oh,
there are beautiful beaches in the Bahamas. It's in the Caribbean, and that is the first country that has a central bank digital currency. It's called the sand dollar because the beaches are so pretty. They call the CBDC the sand dollar. So the Bahamas dollar is pegged to the US dollar.
Okay.
So, it's a little bit like owning a US dollar. You can only use it within the Bahamas at the moment. So you wouldn't be able to buy the sand dollar from Mumbai.
India.
You would have to travel to the Bahamas. But having said that, there are many other countries that are doing experiments at the moment. In China, the PBOC, the People's Bank of China, has done experiments in many cities and has rolled out a digital renminbi, and for experimental purposes. And there are other countries like Uruguay in South America. They have run an experiment. In Switzerland, there's an experiment that is not for individuals, but it's for financial institutions. This is what is called a wholesale CBDC. So it's a CBDC that is only available among financial institutions, and that has also been tested. So quite a lot is happening. And of course, you're mentioning that the Reserve Bank of India is also tying up with other central banks, such as the Monetary Authority of Singapore. And there's a lot of cooperation among central banks at the moment to figure out how to do these cross-border payments cheaper and more effectively.
Okay. Do you see it being used by governments for income transfer?
Yeah.
That seems to be very tempting. Say, for instance, you want girls' education. You don't want that money spent anywhere else. So if the government put in a CBDC, which the receiver can only use for education and not maybe for alcohol, you think these kinds of things can happen?
That's an excellent question. And So these new technologies, these crypto technologies, which are based on blockchains, they allow you smart contracts. So in principle, it is possible that a CBDC would be wired from the government, say the Ministry of Finance, into your wallet with certain prescriptions of what to do with this money. So you could use it to buy schooling, but not alcohol. I think that's an excellent example. And in principle, that's possible. I don't believe that any country is exploring that at the moment, but
Okay.
that these are the kind of possibilities that the technology is opening. And so it allows you to do also taxation, and both taxation and payouts by the government in a much more effective and much more targeted way in principle.
Okay. Well, actually, in India, some private companies experimented with this when they
Yeah,
wanted to sponsor vaccines for their employees. Initially when vaccines were priced, now of course the government has taken up the entire
yeah,
responsibility. But initially they were priced, so this e-rupee was experimented, and it was reasonably successful, I'm told, though on a very very small scale. The other, I mean, two couple of doubts that come to me uh, when Facebook announced that they're going to have their stablecoin Libra, and then of course they renamed it to call it DM. All central banks protested a lot. Uh,
yeah.
why that? Why were they so scared that Facebook will launch the DM?
Well, Facebook has 2 billion users
Yeah,
globally. The biggest bank, as far as I understand,
will
has
not have
only
so many.
1/10 of that or so in terms
Yes.
of customers. So the scale of the customer base would just be enormous,
Yeah.
and it would be, a coin that would be available all over the world. So you could transfer money in dollars, all over the world. And that could potentially be destabilizing for some countries, right? So countries could become dollarized, and that in turn is another reason why central banks are so keen to run their own CBDC. They want to have something where technology companies can innovate on top of the domestic currency, as opposed to using foreign currencies such as the dollar or renminbi or yen or euro in order to do this innovation. So I would really see central bank digital currency as a foundation for a much bigger financial system that is based on new technologies. Oftentimes that's referred to as decentralized finance, but I'm not sure that is quite the right word.
Okay, okay. Let me bring it down again to all of us. Perhaps everyone is not worried so much about monetary policy and financial stability, which may be impacted if economies got dollarized. I mean, central banks will become powerless. But something more which will touch all of us. Do you think there will be less robbery if there is only digital currencies? I mean, you can't steal, right? Even if you lost your purse, you have your password. So
Yeah.
perhaps there will be less robberies. You think?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, in many countries, um, death or violence related to robberies is related to cash. This could be cash that you carry on you, or cash that you have under the mattress. And if cash is digital, it's there's certainly an additional step that you would have to take to get that digital cash, right? So
Back.
just getting your
Yes.
phone isn't enough. You also have to have the password. Now, perhaps you can get that password in some way, but it's certainly not that obvious.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the digital cash in terms could be in many different places in digital space. So potentially that could reduce crime, because now, as a robber, you wouldn't expect that your neighbor or somebody who lives down the street
Yeah.
has cash in the house. They probably have it
Yeah.
in digital form, and how do you steal that?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess most of us are more scared of losing our phones than losing our money. We won't mind if a little bit of money is gone, but we can't really live without the phone. There's so much
Yeah.
stored there. Okay, but Tobias, what is the downside? I'm trying to guess all the upsides, but a total no cash economy, all CBDCs. What can be the downside? Hacking, you think?
Yeah, I would say three things. So one is you have to make sure that the system is resilient against cyber attacks. Companies, central banks, corporations are attacked all the time. Individuals are attacked all the time. And, I think everybody in the audience has gotten an email asking for something that could then open the gates to your bank account or so. And so it's not the technology alone, but it's the intersection between people and technology, right? There are many who are trying to scam you into revealing information that then allows them access. So this is one thing, cybersecurity. Secondly, as I said, this could innovate in terms of financial intermediation, new financial services. And that's very good, but of course it could undermine existing banks. So banks really have to also update their
Come up to
technologies
speed.
to make sure that they can compete with the new entrants. And then finally, not everybody, nearly everybody has cell phones today, but not
Yes.
everybody has cell phones. So how do you do this when you don't have cell phones? Perhaps you don't have enough income to own a cell phone. Now, we have seen in some countries with fairly high poverty that, you do have then services where, say, your corner shop or so allows you to transfer in between the digital account and physical cash or so. So there would certainly be some role for physical cash in the future as well.
Okay, okay. Yeah, fair enough. Actually, as we now realize, we can even be out of power and out of internet. So perhaps a little
Exactly.
bit of paper money will always work.
Exactly.
Very quickly, I think I have a couple of minutes. So just one final question. In fact, I'm going to ask you where we began cryptocurrencies. A lot of central bankers are also worried about Bitcoin. Our own central
Yeah.
banker has said that he's seriously concerned. Why are
Yeah.
central bankers concerned about cryptocurrencies?
So one reason is that it is fully decentralized. So it can be used to transfer cash, and central banks can't go after an entity to enforce capital controls or tax arbitrage, right? Say you get wealth, you don't want to pay taxes, you could use Bitcoins to move the money away. And so that is one concern. It's very hard to enforce that wealth stays within the country. Secondly, it's very volatile, right? You have seen a massive run up in Bitcoin prices, but you also have seen massive declines. And when you own a stock or a bond, you get payouts, right? You get dividends if you own a stock, and you get coupons if you own a bond. But with Bitcoin, there's no cash flow. It is pure speculation.
Yes.
And, in principle, it could go to zero one day. And so all the wealth that you have in Bitcoin could, in principle, go to zero. There's nothing that tells you that there's any intrinsic value in this. And so those are two of the main reasons why central bankers are worried.
Okay. Well, I should have asked you a question on monetary policy, but the time is saying that we have exhausted our half an hour. Can we squeeze in another question, or should we call it a day?
Yes, Lata, absolutely.
Okay. You mean I can ask? Okay. Well, then let me squeeze in for. Do you see monetary policy, getting impacted by CBDCs? Will it be very different if the US were to have a CBDC compared to if it didn't have? How will monetary policy work?
So one important question is whether there's an interest rate on these digital tokens, right, on the digital cash. So on the one hand, if there was an interest rate, it would be a little bit like a savings account. And that could help monetary policy because when the central bank varies the interest rate, that could directly impact your interest rate in the wallet. So that in principle could help. But of course, on the other hand, you might want to treat digital cash like cash. And cash, of course, doesn't have an interest. So most central banks today are going towards a zero interest rate for digital cash. And, in that case, it is very similar to physical cash. So it doesn't transmit monetary policy, but because it's expected to be a relatively small share of total money outstanding, it probably doesn't inhibit monetary policy too much.
Okay, but if you had all digital currencies and you had negative interest rates, people would go out and spend quickly, right? You want to boost up the economy.
Yeah.
You can just push CBDCs into people's wallets.
Right, exactly. So if you push a CBDC, say you do a transfer program like during COVID, right? There was some transfers from the government. You would expect that much of that cash is invested into interest-bearing or dividend-bearing securities like stocks or bonds, so that you do actually earn interest. In particular, if there's a negative interest rate on CBDC, then of course you would rather want to invest that into assets that earn interest. And so this is exactly what we saw last year in many countries in this pandemic, when the government paid checks to the population. Much of that was saved in assets such as stocks and bonds that earn, either dividends or interest.
That's right. I think we've more than taken our time. We've taken 3 more minutes from the next speakers. So, Tobias, it was a pleasure listening to you. Thank you very much for clarifying some very lay doubts that I had, that people would have had on central bank digital currencies. Maybe 2 years from now when we speak, we will all know what it is. It might be ubiquitously available. Thank you very much, Adrian, for a very, very enlightening half hour.
Wonderful to see you. Thanks so much for having me, and very warm greetings from Washington, D.C. to Mumbai or anywhere in India. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lata, for beautifully moderating that session. In fact, the entire session in a way has opened up our eyes in terms of all the understanding that we needed. And thank you very much, Tobias, for joining us. I'm going to wish you a great day ahead, as it's going to be a good night in India over here. But thank you once again for being part of the fest. Thank you once again.
All the very best for the rest of the function.
Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, with that, we call it a wrap to another exciting session. And I'm sure with looking at the questions that are flowing in still, I'm sure it's turned out to be absolutely insightful. But stay tuned, because we'll also be back with the day 3 of the fest. More speakers, more insights flowing in your way for the day 3 as well. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.